Her message lit up my phone at midnight, a picture, a question, and a warmth in her words I'd never felt before. That night, everything between us quietly changed. It was past midnight, and the quiet in my apartment felt almost tangible. The hum of the city outside was distant, muffled, leaving only the low flicker of my desk lamp and the soft ticking of my wall clock. I was scrolling aimlessly through my phone when a notification made me pause. Her name appeared on the screen, my mom's friend, someone I'd always known in the background of my life, someone I'd never really thought about in this way. The message was simple, almost casual, a photo accompanied by the words, "Do you think it's perfect?" I blinked at the screen. It was a picture of her sitting by the window, a small vase of freshly cut flowers on the table beside her. The evening light spilled across the room, highlighting the gentle curve of her smile and the warmth in her eyes. Nothing provocative, nothing shocking, yet the timing, the intimacy of the question, made my heart beat a little faster. I stared at the image longer than I probably should have. The way her fingers brushed lightly against the vase, the way the soft shadows traced her jawline, it all seemed different. Somehow, in the glow of the lamp and the quiet of the night, she looked less like my mom's friend and more like someone I could imagine sharing a moment with, just the two of us, away from everyone else. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. How do you respond to something like this without overthinking it? My mind raced, but my instincts told me to be honest. It's perfect. 3 words, simple, but the weight behind them felt heavier than I expected. I typed slowly, reread the message, then pressed send. The little, seen, notification appeared almost immediately. I imagined her reading it, maybe tilting her head slightly, her lips parting in a small, pleased smile. For a moment, the quiet room felt charged, like the air itself was holding its breath. I set my phone down but couldn't resist glancing back at it every few seconds, as though the glow of her image might somehow reach across the space and touch me. And then came the next message, short, playful, and full of warmth. "You always know how to make me feel better." Even in text, there was a softness to it, a familiarity that carried an undercurrent of something more. My chest tightened. I realized I'd never noticed, or maybe never allowed myself to notice, how much her presence had lingered in my thoughts over the years, a calm in the background of family gatherings, a voice that could make the ordinary feel important. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet of the night press in around me. The room was still, the city still, but somehow everything had shifted. A simple photo, a simple question, and suddenly, the line between familiarity and something more intimate felt thinner than it ever had before. That was the moment I understood. Tonight, the ordinary world of friendship and casual acquaintance had quietly begun to tilt, and I didn't know if I was ready, or willing, to put it back in place. The quiet of the night lingered around me long after our messages stopped for a moment. I found myself staring at the phone, trying not to overthink the glow of her last reply. But my mind betrayed me, drifting back through all the times I had noticed her before, the subtle moments that I'd never fully appreciated until now. She was my mom's friend, yes, but she was more than that. She carried herself with a quiet elegance that seemed effortless, as if the world adjusted around her without her even trying. At family gatherings, she had always floated through rooms with a serene confidence, chatting easily with adults while somehow making me feel like my thoughts mattered. There was a warmth in her voice that I remembered from childhood, the way she would ask about my school projects, the little victories, or even my casual complaints, and actually listen. No condescension, no forced attention. Just a real presence, grounded and steady. Tonight, though, that same presence felt different. The casual elegance I had always admired suddenly seemed intimate, almost personal. In the picture she had sent me, she looked relaxed, softer than the poised figure I remembered in daylight. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the soft light from the lamp. The curve of her smile seemed gentler, more genuine. And her eyes, those eyes held a quiet curiosity, a kind of invitation that left me unsettled in the best way. I could hear her voice in my memory, soft, deliberate, carrying a warmth that lingered longer than the words themselves. The laughter that had once echoed in my mom's kitchen now felt like a tether pulling me closer, a reminder of all the small moments I'd ignored. The way she leaned slightly forward when listening, the way her hands moved naturally while she spoke, it was comforting, human, and impossibly captivating. It wasn't just physical either. There was a depth to her that I had only glimpsed before, a subtle vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. I remembered the night my mom left early from a gathering, and she had stayed behind, chatting with me about life in a way adults rarely did. I had laughed at her jokes, smiled at her stories, felt unexpectedly understood. Back then, I didn't think much of it, but now, with the late-night message lingering in my mind, those memories felt alive, vivid, and charged with a new kind of meaning. I leaned back in my chair, letting the memories wash over me. The quiet of my apartment contrasted sharply with the warmth I felt thinking of her. Something about the night made her feel closer than ever, not physically, not in reality, but in the spaces between thought and feeling. I realized that the line between familiarity and something more delicate, more intimate, was starting to blur. And in that quiet, I understood something I hadn't admitted before. She had always left an impression on me, subtle but undeniable, and tonight, that impression was starting to pull me in a direction I hadn't anticipated, a direction I wasn't sure I was ready to explore, but couldn't resist either. The night stretched on, and my phone seemed to pulse in my hand, each vibration a small jolt that made my chest tighten. She had responded again, this time with a playful tone, teasing me about my earlier reply. "You always make it sound so serious. Can't you just say it's perfect without making it a lecture?" I smiled, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet apartment. Her words were light, teasing, but beneath them, there was a warmth I couldn't ignore. I typed back slowly, carefully choosing each word, trying to balance honesty with the casualness she seemed to want. "It is perfect. But I can't help noticing how good you make it look." She paused. I could almost feel her hesitation through the pause in the chat, the little typing bubble that appeared and then disappeared. When she finally replied, her message was softer, tinged with a vulnerability that made my heart thrum unexpectedly. "You really know how to make someone feel appreciated, don't you?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and realized that I had been holding my breath. It was strange, how a conversation that seemed so simple could carry this weight, this quiet tension that made my stomach flutter. I imagined her on the other side of the screen, perhaps curled up on her couch, the soft glow of her lamp casting shadows across her face, hair falling in loose strands around her shoulders. Every little detail seemed magnified in the silence of the night. We fell into a rhythm, back and forth exchanges that were both playful and sincere. She asked me questions about my day, but not in a perfunctory way. She asked in a way that made me want to answer truthfully, to share things I might otherwise have kept to myself. In turn, I found myself noticing the way she described her own day, the subtle frustrations, the quiet triumphs, and feeling a connection I hadn't expected. There was a pause between messages at one point, long enough that I started to worry I had said too much, or too little. And then her reply came, soft, careful. "It's strange. I don't usually share things like this with anyone." My heart caught in my chest. The words carried a weight that felt almost tangible, a quiet confession of trust. I wanted to reach through the phone, to offer reassurance in person, to show her that her trust wasn't misplaced. I typed slowly, deliberately. "You don't have to feel strange. I like hearing from you. I mean, I like talking to you." Her reply came almost immediately, but it was simple, understated. "I like talking to you too." It was nothing extraordinary, nothing that would make anyone else pause. But to me, it felt like a small revolution. In the quiet glow of my room, in the stillness of the night, her words lingered, and I realized that something had shifted. The safe distance we had always maintained was dissolving, replaced by a connection that felt intimate, tentative, and entirely irresistible. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what it would be like if this conversation didn't end tonight, if this feeling, this gentle warmth between us, could stretch beyond the confines of a screen. The conversation slowed, not because the connection was fading, but because neither of us knew how to navigate the quiet spaces that had begun to stretch between our messages. The phone screen glowed softly in the dark, illuminating my face as I stared at it, trying to decipher her pauses. Every ellipsis she sent, every moment of silence, felt loaded with something unspoken, something delicate that neither of us dared name. She finally typed hesitantly, "I feel a little silly for asking you that earlier. I don't usually share things like this." There was a pause before I replied, because the words I wanted to send seemed inadequate, too clumsy to convey the warmth and respect I felt for her. I typed, erased, and typed again, finally settling on, "You don't have to feel silly. I'm glad you shared it with me." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavier than anything I had expected. I realized, with a sudden clarity, that she was trusting me in a way that went beyond casual friendship. And in turn, I felt a quiet responsibility, a desire to honor that trust with the gentleness it deserved. I imagined her on the other side of the screen. Perhaps she had shifted slightly on her couch, the soft cushions rising beneath her as she curled her legs, one hand brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The lamp beside her cast warm light across her features, revealing the subtle vulnerability that had always been hidden beneath her composed exterior. It made my chest tighten in a way that was both thrilling and unnerving. We lingered in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. I could feel the pull of something unspoken between us, a tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but alive, like the faint electric charge in the air before a storm. It made me aware of every detail, the way my fingers hovered over the keyboard, the faint hum of the city outside, the quiet, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Finally, she broke the silence, almost shyly. "You always know how to make me feel seen. I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before." Her words hit me differently than I expected. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that we were sharing something rare. My fingers itched to reply, to tell her that the feeling was mutual, that her presence had always lingered in my thoughts in ways I hadn't understood until now. But I hesitated, wanting to find the perfect phrasing that could capture both honesty and care. I finally typed, "You are. And I mean it." She read it almost immediately. I imagined her lips curving into a soft, surprised smile, her eyes lifting toward the ceiling in thought. That brief, delicate smile, even imagined, was enough to send a warmth spreading through my chest. We didn't need to fill the rest of the night with words. The unspoken understanding between us, the tension, the subtle pull toward one another, was more than enough. For the first time, I realized that this connection wasn't just a fleeting curiosity. It was something quiet, powerful, and entirely new, and neither of us could ignore it anymore. The night felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed, giving us space to feel, to breathe, and to simply exist in the quiet intimacy of each other's presence, even if it was only through glowing words on a screen. The conversation had grown quieter, but not in distance, in closeness. There was a new softness in her words, a willingness to share that I hadn't seen before. She sent a message that made my chest tighten. "Sometimes I feel invisible, even when people are around. Like I'm just part of the scenery." I paused, reading the words over and over. The glow of the screen seemed warmer somehow, like it was offering me a glimpse of a side of her that very few had seen. Without thinking, I typed back honestly, my fingers lingering over each key. "You're never invisible. You have this presence. The kind that makes people notice, the kind that lingers, even when you're not in the room." There was a pause. I imagined her reading my words, perhaps tilting her head slightly, the light catching the edge of her cheek, the corner of her mouth tugging up into a faint, almost shy smile. Her reply came slowly, carefully. "Thank you? I don't hear that often. Not like this." That simple acknowledgement sent a warmth through me I hadn't anticipated. I realized that this wasn't just a conversation. It was a bridge, built carefully with honesty and small moments of trust. We were both stepping onto it, aware of the gap that had always existed between us, the years, the roles, the expectations, and daring, quietly, to move closer. We lingered in this space, talking about everyday things, the mundane details of our days. But every sentence carried weight, subtle and deliberate. She described her afternoon, a walk through a quiet park, the way sunlight had caught the leaves in golden patterns. I described my own day, sharing small triumphs and minor frustrations, but also how much her messages made me pause and think, in a way that nothing else had that evening. Her next message was simple, almost hesitant. "I didn't realize how much I'd enjoy talking to you like this." I smiled, the quiet hum of my apartment amplifying the feeling of connection. "I enjoy it too," I replied. "More than I thought I would." There it was, the acknowledgement of something neither of us had named but both felt. The gap between friendship and something more intimate was narrowing. I imagined her curled up on the couch, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, a soft glow from the lamp reflecting in her eyes. The thought made my chest tighten, a fluttering warmth that spread across my shoulders and down my arms. She replied almost immediately, a simple word. "Me too." And just like that, the night felt suspended in a delicate balance. We weren't rushing. We weren't confessing. But the quiet acknowledgement, the shared vulnerability, the mutual curiosity, it all hung in the air, palpable and sweet. For the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to sit across from her, to see that smile in person, to feel the subtle warmth of her hand brushing against mine in casual conversation. Not a leap, not a rush, just the first, tentative steps towards something deeper. And in that small, unspoken way, we had crossed a line, one built on trust, quiet attention, and the beginnings of something neither of us could ignore. The following evening, the conversation picked up again, but this time it carried a different rhythm, slower, softer, like a gentle tide brushing against the shore. There was a subtle shift in the way we communicated. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the pauses, the timing, the way our messages lingered, almost staring one another to bridge the invisible gap. She asked casually, almost in passing, "What are you doing tomorrow?" The words seemed innocent, but they struck me differently. I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. Her tone suggested possibility, an unspoken question hovering between us, a quiet invitation to cross into a space either of us had dared enter before. I typed carefully, choosing words that were light but sincere. "Nothing special, just the usual." "Why?" There was a hesitation in my own reply I hadn't expected. I wasn't just answering her question. I was feeling the pull of her presence, imagining her across the city, perhaps on her couch, reading my words, thinking of me as I was thinking of her. Her reply came almost immediately. I enjoy talking to you. Sometimes it feels like you understand more than anyone else." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. The apartment was quiet, yet my mind buzzed with the warmth her message carried. I imagined her shifting slightly on her side of the room, fingers brushing her hair behind her ear, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The thought made my heart thrum, not in fear, not in anxiety, but in that tender, exhilarating way that comes from realizing someone's attention is quietly, unmistakably drawn to you. We continued talking, lingering on small details of our day, but the conversation became more intimate in the way silence can be intimate. We both typed slowly, savoring the pauses between messages. Her responses were soft, thoughtful, almost like a whisper through the screen. I could imagine her leaning closer to the light of the lamp, the warm glow highlighting her face, the calm steadiness of her presence filling the quiet. At one point, she sent a small joke, light and teasing, and I realized I laughed aloud, my phone resting against my chest. The sound seemed to fill the apartment, and I pictured her reaction, a quiet smile curving her lips, eyes lighting up with that same gentle warmth I had always admired. The moment was fleeting, simple, but it carried a weight that neither of us needed to name. Then came her final message for the night. "Talking to you makes everything feel lighter. Even if it's just through messages." I typed back honestly, letting my words linger before sending. "Me too. You make the night feel better. Somehow." We didn't say goodnight immediately. Instead, we lingered, the conversation stretching into a comfortable quiet. For the first time, the distance felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, one we were both eager, silently, to cross. My mind replayed every imagined movement, every subtle gesture I could picture her making. And in that quiet, the connection between us felt closer than it had ever been, tender, charged, and impossibly alive. The night ended with unspoken understanding, leaving me with the warmth of her presence echoing in my chest, a feeling that lingered long after the phone went dark. The night had deepened into stillness, but the glow of my phone lingered, warm against my fingertips. Her messages had tapered off, leaving a quiet that was almost comforting. I realized I hadn't just been talking to her. I had been sharing pieces of myself I rarely revealed, and in return, she had let me see her quietly, honestly, without pretense. Then her last message came, a photo of her hand, holding a simple cup of tea, the faint light from her lamp casting gentle shadows across her skin. Beneath it, she had written, "Thank you for making me feel seen tonight." I stared at it, the screen reflecting in my eyes. Her words were soft, understated, yet they carried a weight that pressed warmly against my chest. I typed slowly, deliberately. "You are." Short, simple, but full of everything I couldn't say in more words. I imagined her reading it, maybe tilting her head slightly, the corner of her mouth curving into that familiar, gentle smile. I pictured her hair falling across her shoulders, the warmth of the lamp catching the strands, her eyes reflecting a quiet acknowledgement. In that imagined moment, the distance between us shrank, becoming almost negligible, though we were still separated by rooms, city blocks, and lives apart. The night stretched quietly around me. I lay back on my bed, phone resting against my chest, and allowed myself to linger in the feeling of her presence. It wasn't lustful, nor urgent, it was a steady, gentle warmth, like the first glow of sunlight on a winter morning. I realized that this connection, however tentative or quiet, had rooted itself firmly in my mind and heart. Her final words echoed softly. "I feel lighter talking to you. More understood." I thought of her voice, the way it had always carried a subtle kindness, a warmth that invited trust. And I understood, truly, deeply, that what we had shared tonight was the beginning of something rare. Something that didn't need declarations or promises to be felt fully. I imagined, for the first time, the possibility of seeing her in person without the barrier of screens. I could picture us sitting across from each other in a quiet room, the faint brush of her hand against mine in casual conversation, the ease of laughter shared freely, the steady rhythm of two hearts beginning to notice one another in a way that was patient, deliberate, and real. There was no rush, no leap into the unknown. Just the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence, the subtle tension of shared trust, and the warmth of mutual understanding. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it fully, the pull towards something more, something deeper, something quietly irresistible. The phone went dark as I finally set it aside, but the feeling lingered. The night, the messages, the imagined closeness, it all remained with me, a soft, steady ember in my chest. I knew that this wasn't the end. It was a beginning, one that promised warmth, connection, and the patient unfolding of a bond neither of us could ignore. In the silence, I smiled, feeling the gentle echo of her presence, and realized that sometimes, the most powerful moments are the ones that happen quietly, in the spaces between words.